Hey everyone, Margarita here. This is going to be number 2 on the near-death experience videos. So you should watch these in order. I did film the number 1, which was, I didn't actually die and come back, but I came very close. And it ties right into this video as well. And prior to watching that first one, it would make a lot more sense if you watched the first 2 videos of my severe carbon monoxide poisoning untreated prior to watching the first near-death experience video, because they all kind of tie together. The incidences all piggyback off of each other, which each one leads to the next. So watching those 2 videos first in order would be more beneficial, and then the first near-death experience, and then the second, and then I'm going to film the third. So if you watch them in that order, it would make more sense. And then there's 2 additional videos regarding that first situation, the first near-death experience situation, because those are located in 2 places. They're located under the severe carbon monoxide poisoning untreated, and they're located under the Detroit Hospital human trafficking section on my channel. So if you watch those 2 extra videos that are under the Detroit Hospital human trafficking section, there's a total of 4 under there. If you watch those 4 first, then go to the near-death experience videos, watch the first, the second, then the third, it would all make a lot more sense to whoever's viewing the videos, since everything is kind of connected, to the last situation. So the second near-death experience happened on January 23rd, 2018, and I was upstairs in my room, in my bed, by the time it got pretty severe. I did have a 4-hour brain swelling episode, and it was due to carbon monoxide poisoning. I was just unaware of what the source was yet. I was suspecting it was carbon monoxide, but I didn't have the source. And the people around me were not in that extreme of a state. So it got even more confusing. And it was caused by the temporary restaurants I went to go work at the last 10 weeks of pregnancy. Little Daddy's restaurant in Taylor, Michigan. That's where it all happened at. That's where I left and then went to the hospital and had the baby. Suffering from it, which created the first near-death experience and the first brain injury and the future problems going forward. So if you view all of those videos, you'll understand why there were so many issues and ongoing problems, which then led to my return to the source of the poisoning 7 months later when I was not planning on ever coming back. I'd been self-employed for many years at that point. There was no need for me to do that. I was already way higher up on the food chain. I just took a step down from doing everything I was doing, and the result of the first brain injury and near-death experience was me returning to the source of the poisoning. So I returned 7 months later, worked about 14 months of weekends only, and was removed from the source the entire week, every week, and so it made it even more confusing, because I was removed from it all those times, and then at the same time, the issue that was causing it was the ventilation system not being maintained properly, and then they operated without it working at all numerous times. So there was different degrees of how much, different degrees of poisoning, how much carbon monoxide was building up in the building at different times. It was all different along the way. But what had happened there toward the end in January of 2018 is they started to repeatedly do this more often. The ventilation system issue was getting more severe. And it was at the same time I just returned there at the end of 2016. Same thing had happened at that time, and then they significantly fixed it for a while. It just wasn't 100% fixed, and then they had significantly more issues at the beginning of January 2018. So that's when they operated without it working at all several times, and with very high levels several times. So it was numerous issues that led to that extreme overload. And by this time, I shouldn't have been there at all. I should have been long gone. Never should have returned, and I couldn't figure out why I couldn't get the pieces of my life back, and it was because of the carbon monoxide and the repeated exposures and what was actually going on. I just was unaware. So by the time I had gotten to the point where I was upstairs in my room in my bed, this had been going on since January 11th, 2018. So this is about, 12 days in? I'd woken up on January 11th with my brain pressed against my skull. Now, there is carbon monoxide poisoning that is delayed. You can experience delayed effects. And I've met other people that this has happened to as well, and read many case studies where there's been situations where that has happened as well. So mine was 4 days delayed from the time I had last left that building, which made it even more confusing. That's why I wasn't sure exactly what was going on almost 2 weeks into this. So I woke up January 11, 2018. My brain was pressed against my skull. I was experiencing all these severe symptoms, and I couldn't even explain them all, or most of them, because there were so many. There was over 30 or 40 at that point, and I couldn't put it into words because it was so extreme. I went to bed normal and woke up like that, and I couldn't figure it out, especially because it had been such a long time since I was actually in that building. Now, by the time January 23rd had rolled around, 12 days later, I had highly suspected carbon monoxide. I just didn't have the source, and I had a list of about 20 things I thought it could be, and it was one of the primary suspects on the list. I just, again, didn't have the source, and didn't know about the delayed neurologic sequela. I did not know about that at that time yet. So because I didn't know what it was and didn't realize how extreme it was, I took a bunch of pills, went into work, tried to just fight through it, because by this time my income had not been right for about 2 years, and it was all due to their actions, of the restaurant's actions, and this ongoing problem they'd had, and me giving birth while suffering from it, and then not being given oxygen during labor and delivery as well. So all of that played a role in all of this in the first place. So I went back in there thinking I just needed every last dollar I could get. I don't know what's wrong. Whatever's happening is getting worse. I don't have daily functioning from having the baby. Never returned to normal from having the baby. All these things were getting worse. I was slowly losing functioning over time. And I'm just thinking I got to get every dollar I can. So I went in there, took a bunch of pills, thought I could just fight through it. Problem is, you can't fight through carbon monoxide poisoning. You have to be 100% removed from it, and you have to get treatment, or you're just going to make matters worse. It's never going to stop, or you're going to permanently damage or kill yourself. But then again, in this moment, I was unaware. So I should not have been trying to go to work, but I really did need that money, and I just kind of fought through it, and I just stayed very quiet because my head hurt so bad, it hurt to talk. And I just used the words when I had to while talking to customers, and then would just stay really quiet, do what I had to do, and hurry up and get out of there. But my feet were moving fairly fast, but my brain was extremely injured. The hot gas was coming out of my ears, pouring out my eyes. Every exhaled breath was extremely hot. My brain was pressed against my skull, burnt to a crisp. The back left side was throbbing those first 12 days. And then, I just stayed that way, and I couldn't figure it out on top of all those other symptoms. So by the time January 23rd, 2018 rolls around, I'd been stuck like that for 12 days straight with no relief. And, just wasn't 100% sure what it was, but I went upstairs and laid down. Now, mind you, I went back in the building 2 additional weekends where this was going on, and that's why it slowly got worse. So instead of it being 4 days later, about 2 days after each of those 2 weekends, about 2 days later, it got worse. The burning got worse. The amount of pressing against my skull got worse. So those 2 extra weekends I went in there. So by the time the 23rd rolled around, I'm having a 4-hour brain swelling episode upstairs in my room, in my bed. I'm just laying there, and I'm basically deprived of oxygen at a cellular level at this point, and I can barely move anyway. I don't have any functioning. Couldn't even get any household tasks done whatsoever at this point for a couple months at this point. And I just didn't know what was wrong. And I knew none of this was normal. I was a very high functioning individual. So I'm just laying there. The pressure is getting harder and harder, pressed against my skull. It's extremely hot, worse than it ever was before. It feels like my brain has a very extreme degree of sunburn all throughout. The gases were just radiating out of every crevice of my head, my brain, my whole everything at that point. And I couldn't figure it out. So I just laid there, and I had called in some migraine pills to my doctor's office, and I didn't have a headache history or a migraine history at all. I was just assuming that's what you would call this. What else would it be, something that extreme? So he did give me the pills, called them into the pharmacy. I took one. I think that was the first time I took one. It didn't really work, though, because that's not what it was for. Maybe it worked a little bit. I'm not sure. I took a Motrin 800 with it. And that may have been like what actually saved my life in the long run. But I didn't really know. The pills weren't doing anything. It was swelling up higher and higher. The pressure was getting greater and greater, pressed against my skull, laying in my bed. Went on for 4 hours like that. I said goodbye to my kids. I knew I was going to die. I knew that was it. And all I kept thinking was, my life insurance policy is not allocated out properly. They're going to lose the house. No one knows what to do with the money. I'm the one running and building everything. Those were my last thoughts prior to falling out and losing consciousness. Now, I remember at one point staring at a certain spot in my ceiling in my room, and I just remember knowing I'm going to die. This is it. And I kept thinking, I haven't even finished what I came here to do yet. I'll do anything to stay here. The baby was only 22 months old. I knew he needed me. He wasn't going to make it far without me. There was no one to replace me. My other kids were older. They were teenagers. They would have been fine without me at that point, but the younger one wouldn't have been. So I kept thinking, and I basically made a deal with God, and I said I would do anything to stay here for him, to be here for him. I'll do anything. And then I lost consciousness, fell all the way out. My brain exploded internally. So that pressed against the skull feeling, it had nowhere to go, and it broke all the way through and exploded internally. Now, that was the blood-brain barrier at its max, expanding, and that was the carbon monoxide pressing against it, ready to break through that barrier. And that's the blood-brain barrier is what protects toxins and chemicals of all types from everybody getting any particles that they breathe in or swallow or inject or whatever, soak through the skin, however it gets in there. That's what stops all that from entering one's bloodstream and one's system. So the rest of the world has their blood-brain barrier intact. Now, what happened was that exploded through, because if you have an abundance of neurotoxins, that's what'll happen. It'll break through the blood-brain barrier, but usually it's not the entire thing. Mine was the entire thing because the carbon monoxide took over my entire brain. So that had completely exploded internally, broke through, and all that carbon monoxide that was pressed against it had then busted through and flooded my entire system. It was flowing up and down everywhere in my entire system. Every finger, every toe, every spot in my body, it was flowing continuously. And I stayed that way. And it came in waves. It would move up and down my whole system in waves. I stayed that way for about 34 and a half months until I eventually got some treatment and had almost 2 years of treatment before I cleared that degree of everything from that initial overload. And I'm still clearing that initial overload. I'm just not in an extreme state with my brain sagging anymore. Now, when I came to, that back left side that was throbbing and everything was pressurized and tight against my skull, now it felt like there was several inches of space between my brain and my skull, and that back left side was now sagging instead of just throbbing. So it kind of felt like my brain needed a bra. But I don't know how you would really get that under control because it's like internal. Eventually I did order a head wrap a couple of years in, and it does work. So by this time now there's knots. The carbon monoxide flooded through, and there's knots of the carbon monoxide, fist size full of it in a couple spots within my brain, and it stayed that way for those 34 and a half months also until I received enough treatment to cross that first threshold and clear the inches of space, the sagging and throbbing, and the knots. It all cleared at one time on Thanksgiving of 2020 after almost 2 years of everyday treatment. That's how I got it all cleared to the degree I have it today. Now I am still clearing that initial overload. It's been 7 years since that day, a little over 7 years, and 6 years since I've been treating. So that is still going on. But I felt all of this happen. I was dead in my bed for 4 hours, so I had a brain swelling episode for 4 hours, and then I was dead in my bed for 4 hours, and nobody came to check on me. Now, it was fairly late, and they knew something was wrong. I'm shocked nobody came in. They were all in different parts of the house. But when I came to, it was like something out of a movie where when you see someone, dead and their soul jumps back in their body and then they take a deep breath and kind of gasp. That's exactly what happened to me. But I didn't jump up because of the brain issue. And it felt so loose. It felt like so many inches of space were between my brain and my skull. I was scared to move. But I did come back in that manner. I just slowly sat up. And I was afraid it was going to go back to that extreme state of being pressed against my skull at any second. because I didn't really fully understand what happened in that moment. And then I couldn't communicate. So now I've had 2 brain injuries. Now I really can't communicate, can't string sentences together, can't even explain what happened. And I was so fragile, and all that carbon monoxide overloaded in my system went into every cell, and then about 10 times more, probably 100 times more. It went everywhere, but more so to my brain, because your brain takes the most oxygen out of any organ. So the majority of it goes to the brain first, and then the heart, and then everywhere else. And that's what ended up happening. So the majority of it was in my brain, but it was everywhere. And I was the most extremely overloaded with carbon monoxide any human being could be, who could possibly be and still be alive. So I was just packed to the max. My whole system was full of it. And because I was scared to move, now that by this time I hadn't been able to use my phone for quite some time. I didn't even know where it was. I couldn't scream. I couldn't have the sound of my own voice. Every nerve in my brain, with every little sound that my own voice made or any sound around me, it shot extreme shock waves through my entire brain, through every nerve. And I stayed that way for years as well. It was extremely painful. I literally lived in the most extreme degree of pain any human being could be in for 34 and a half months straight before there was 1 day of relief. And even then, it was not positive movement forward. It was up and down, re-exposures, and this is still kind of going on to this day, just not as extreme and not as continuous. Although it is continuous, but it's more waxing and waning. So when I went to get up off the bed, I slowly got off the bed, got myself to the edge of the bed, slowly came downstairs because I couldn't yell, couldn't scream, couldn't call for help, couldn't even yell within my home. Everybody was in different rooms. I very slowly came downstairs into the front living room where my ex was playing video games, and he has ADD anyway, but I was trying to say something had happened and trying to explain it, but I didn't have the words for it. And not only that, he wasn't really listening to what I was saying, and it was past 1 o'clock in the morning. So it was swelling up for 4 hours. I was dead for 4 hours. By then it's 1 something in the morning, and he's the only one awake, and he's not even comprehending what I'm saying had happened, and I couldn't even describe it properly. But it wasn't as extreme because it was a different feeling. Now it's sagging with all these extra inches of space. I didn't know how to describe it or what to say had happened. And even then, the way they check for it at the hospital, even if they'd called 911 or I'd called 911, they would have never found it in my system with how it works. And now they're taught to check for it. So it would have never even been found. They would have acted like I was crazy or something, or they would have put me through a test, that would have finished me off, and I would have been dead if I had done that. I was walking such a fine line between life and death for so long. It was about 3.5 years, solid years, and maybe even closer to 4. And then I didn't really fully, get past that degree until I got into my house in Ohio in the fall of 2022. So it was about 4.5 years by the time I'd gotten to a place where my brain tissue finally started to close up a little bit, not be so open. A lot of that was removed. It took a long time. So I stayed in that extreme state for that long from that day forward. And I did die. I died and came back. But the people around me kept going on with their lives as if that's not what had happened. And they just kept acting like, they just continued on with everyday life like nothing had even happened to me. But it wasn't an injury that you could go around because it was so extreme and so urgent that I get oxygen, because that's what's needed to reverse it. That's how you reverse carbon monoxide poisoning. That's how you heal the brain injuries. Hyperbaric oxygen heals the brain tissue and removes the carbon monoxide from a cellular level. And I could not get treatment for the longest time. So it took about 14 months before I found somewhere to treat. However, I didn't know my mother had Munchausen by proxy. I knew there was always something wrong with her. I just didn't have a name for it. So it was this injury that caused that to become known, because once I started seeking treatment, she began inserting herself in the situation when she realized something had happened to me. And that's where all these falsified medical records started to come into play, where I actually had no medical history like the 20 years prior. So there was no medical history, and then it went right into having all these falsified records suddenly, but she was behind it. And it took me over a year from that point to even figure out that's what had happened and that's what was going on, because I stayed so extremely unwell and so extremely injured. And then she began pumping the people up around me full of delusions, who then began screaming them at me in my face. So all of the people around me continued on with their lives, trying to, act like that's not what's going on, but I'm the one running and building everything. So you can't go around that when I'm the one running and building everything, when I'm that extremely injured and in dire need of oxygen and in physical distress. So that's what created all the conflict and chaos within my home. And then it remained that way for several years due to all of the chaos, the crimes, the conflict, my mother's involvement from behind the scenes, because she was not directly up front and center in any of this. She was all behind the scenes. She did all this. And then all the people around me slowly got manipulated to believe what they thought they were seeing was something different other than what it was. And because I was not receiving treatment at a hospital, it was an illusion. So there's more about that in my main story, and I'm going to come back and go more in depth on my main storyline of surviving severe carbon monoxide poisoning untreated. I'm going to do another section where I go way more in depth about all the extravagant situations that were going on within that. I just had to get that base story out. There's like 22, 23 episodes of that. So I could talk about these other subjects that I do need to get information out on. So if you watch the videos in order, it makes a lot more sense. You can watch those few first, then skip over to the NDE experience, and then go back to watching the carbon monoxide poisoning story. It would make a lot more sense if you watch it in that order and then all the other videos, because it's a lot easier to understand that way. So that's why I'm trying to get a few videos out under each category that I'm talking about. But yeah, it was really hard to get treatment. There was all these factors involved. I did die for 4 hours and come back. No medical intervention. I had already sought treatment numerous times prior. I still wasn't getting help, and many times after, and still didn't get help. So I'll get more into that in all those other episodes. I do have a GoFundMe in the description box of every video. And that's due to I've never received a penny from the people who caused the initial injury. I haven't received compensation whatsoever from anyone. And I keep having all these ongoing issues from all these large agencies and these people who play a role in re-injuring me and causing additional issues along the way. And it's forcing me to not be able to work the way in which I normally would. It's stopping my income. Even though I make money different ways, it's forcing my income to come to a halt. And it's in the process of changing anyway. But right now, my job is to put these videos out there. So that's why I have the GoFundMe. There's many crimes that have come out of this and much destruction of my life and my finances due to all these crimes. So that's the purpose of the GoFundMe. So if you watch the other videos, you'll understand why. And then I do have an email address. If somebody's trying to seek help for carbon monoxide poisoning, they're having a lot of trouble, that's in there as well. Like, share, subscribe, and I'll be back with the third NDE experience. Thanks, bye.